Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of It's Murder Up North, the true crime podcast that focuses on crimes that occur in the north of England, from the infamous to the obscure. Today's episode involves the murder and disappearance of an 8-year-old boy that took place 23 years ago in Manchester. This case stirred up a lot of raw emotions. Manchester was still recovering from the IRA bombing that had occurred the year before, and whenever a child goes missing under mysterious circumstances, inevitably comparisons are made to the crimes of the Moors murderers. Tragically, this case is another where the killer's actions were so bizarre that the news headlines became about the murderer and less about his innocent victim. Jamie Lavis, who was described by his grandmother as a streetwise but lovely little boy. Before we look at what happened to Jamie Lavis, I would like to introduce you to Caitlin and Amy from Eat Crime podcast. Here is a sneak peek of their fantastic show.
Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Caitlin.
And we're the hosts of Eat Crime, a podcast full of delicious mysteries.
You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Eat Crime and on Facebook, Eat Crime Pod.
Here's a few examples of what you'll hear.
Laurencia and Bambi Bembenak.
Do what now?
And he had secretly taken that copy. I don't know why.
Oh, I know why.
To murder her?
For murder.
And I was like, I can't imagine a mom naming their kids Dante and Dante. We're not in a satanic cult.
Yes, I don't know. Let's make that abundantly clear. She seems like provocativity. Is that a word?
She provocativity. Which, I mean, what a businessman.
I know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Murdered people and got paid for it.
It's both true that there is a Conjuring 2, and Conjuring 2 is true. Valerie, get out of here.
Now, let's head to the episode. It is said that it's only when times are tough that you learn who your true friends are. And there is nothing as hard as dealing with the disappearance of a loved one, especially when it is a child who is missing. The heartbroken parents will turn to friends, family, and the kindness of strangers to help them through their nightmare. Karen Spooner and John Lavis would not only suffer the disappearance of their child, but they would be betrayed by someone they had grown to trust. The couple lived on Buckley Street in Openshaw, Manchester, in a 3-bedroom terraced house with their children Jane, Nicola, John and Jamie. They were a normal family, living the usual mundane life of work, school and sibling squabbles. This all changed on the May Bank holiday in 1997. It was Monday the 5th of May and the children were making the most of being off school. John and his little brother Jamie headed out to play on a local supermarket car park. Despite the 3 years between the boys, they were best friends. They would have their usual disagreements that siblings do, but John always looked out for Jamie. While messing about with some of his friends, John lost sight of Jamie, but he wasn't concerned as the little boy often got bored and would go back home or head to a friend's house. So 11-year-old John thought nothing of it and continued to hang out with his friends. When John arrived home at 6 o'clock that evening, he found his little brother wasn't there. Nor had he been back home since the two boys had left at 8:30 that morning. This was unusual for Jamie, who liked to play out all day, but he would always pop in every now and then to have something to eat and a cuddle with his mum. At that time, they weren't overly concerned, believing he may have been at a friend's house and had lost track of time. In their minds, they knew he would be home before nightfall, as Jamie was scared of the dark. Jamie's tea sat uneaten in the kitchen when John Sr. arrived home from work at 8 o'clock that night. The little boy was still not home, and darkness was creeping across the sky. Karen greeted John in an anxious manner, which had been building as the minutes passed. But John calmed her down and reassured her that they would go out and look for him, and they'd probably find him playing on the streets or at a friend's house. The family put on their coats and headed out. They began by knocking on the neighbours' doors and visiting Jamie's friends. They walked the streets where Jamie liked to play, They passed the old mills that cast long shadows, and the quiet rows of terraces with their cobbled alleyways, calling out Jamie's name, but the echoes of their voices was the only answer to their calls. As the streetlights flickered to life with their amber glow and the coldness of night chilled their cheeks, their fears grew for the little boy who was out there somewhere, alone and frightened. Exhausted and unable to find the 8-year-old, the worried family returned to the warmth and brightness of their home, trying not to dwell on the thought of Jamie being in the cold and dark of that spring night. It was at 10 p.m. that Karen reported her son missing, describing Jamie to the 999 operator as being a small 8-year-old, just 4 foot tall with short sandy brown hair and hazel eyes. He was last seen wearing a green jacket and a pair of dark blue jogging trousers. The area of Openshaw was often cited as one of the most deprived areas in the UK, mainly due to the decline of the large industries that had employed generations of Openshaw residents, which included numerous railway companies and a metalworks. The area was once populated by workers from these large factories, which began to close after the 1960s, as well as the miners from nearby Bradford Colliery, which once occupied the site where Manchester City's new Etihad Stadium now stands. With the loss of these major employers in the area, those who relied on them fell on tough times, finding they were unable to find employment elsewhere. Like with many areas where there is high unemployment and few prospects, crime and poverty were rife. This in turn affected small independent businesses in the area that once had prospered now were unsustainable and were forced to close. This resulted in the area being blighted with rundown or derelict buildings, empty shops, old red brick factories stood abandoned, crumbling relics of the area's past prosperity. These dangerous sites, with their disintegrating walls and unstable floors, were enticing to curious children, as well as an ideal place for more illicit activities. Jamie was described as a fiercely independent, adventurous child with a curious mind, and such places would have been fascinating to him. Police began searching these abandoned properties and the wastelands dotted about the area. Divers combed the murky waters of the nearby Ashton Canal and the Goshen reservoirs, while also scouring nearby parks. The day after he was reported missing, news spread quickly and the community came together to support the search efforts. Police conducted door-to-door inquiries in the hope that someone had seen the 4-foot-tall boy with sandy brown hair and a cheeky smile, but no one could recall seeing him that bank holiday Monday. They did receive a lead from a bus driver, who thought he had seen Jamie on his route that day. He claimed he saw a boy matching the 8-year-old's description, playing around at Ashton bus station. When police recovered CCTV footage, they were able to confirm that Jamie had been at the bus station at 10:30 a.m. on the 5th of May. The video showed the carefree boy happily playing under the covered bus stands. Police immediately released the images in a hope that someone would remember seeing the little boy that day. They also broadened their search area to cover the market town of Ashton, a town that was no stranger to tragedy. 34 years earlier, on a cold November day in 1963, a 12-year-old boy was lured away from the town's market by a woman with blonde hair. She offered to give him a lift home, as it was getting dark and his parents would be worried. Once in the car, he was offered a drink of sherry. The trusting boy was taken to Saddleworth Moor by the woman and her partner. There they killed John Kilbride and buried him on the desolate moors along with 4 other innocent children who had also been murdered by Myra, Hindley and Ian Brady. The day the Moors murderers took John Kilbride from Ashton Market would forever haunt the town, and the disappearance of Jamie Lavis reopened the still healing wounds. The community were eager to find the 8-year-old safe and well, but as the days dragged into weeks, hope slowly faded. On the 30th of June, the police made a fresh appeal accompanied by a televised reconstruction of Jamie's last known movements at the bus station. John Jr. bravely portrayed his little brother, as he and Jamie looked very similar. His bravery was rewarded as new leads poured in from all over the city. People have reported seeing Jamie on numerous buses around the Manchester area. One lead was particularly alarming. The caller claimed that there was a body at Bogart Hall Clough, an ancient woodland and park 6 miles away from where Jamie lived. The park had long played a key part in the lives of Manchester residents. It hosted a large suffragette rally in July 1906, which was attended by 15,000 people. More recently, the park hosts charity fun runs and firework displays, as well as being a popular spot for nature lovers. Following the lead, the police conducted a thorough search of the clough, which is a northern term to describe a steep-sided valley. The operation involved dogs, a police helicopter, trained divers, and all but 100 police officers. For hours they combed the dense vegetation, woodland and meadows of the park, as well as a large boating lake. For days they looked for any sign of the little boy, but found nothing. Was this a genuine lead, or a cruel hoax that had caused the police to waste time and resources conducting a fruitless search? During my research, I did learn that the park had been named after a mythical creature, which was common in the folklore of northern England and parts of Scotland. The Bogart was said to be a mischievous house fairy that tended to live under bridges and in ancient woods. Local legend claimed that there was such a creature that lived in the park and was responsible for unexplained disappearances. Could this legend have been the reason for this misleading tip? In October 1997, the police received another tip, this time off 2 children who had a frightening story to tell. They stated that a man had taken them to a park one evening, and while there he showed them a picture of the little boy who was missing and asked them if they'd seen him. The children said they hadn't seen Jamie and started to feel uneasy. The man suddenly pointed to some woodlands and shouted, "There, did you see him?" The children began to back away as he stated that he just saw the little boy amongst the trees. He tried to lure the 2 children into the trees, telling them that they needed to find Jamie. But the children grew frightened by his insistence and managed to run away from him. The 2 children were able to lead police to the spot they had last seen the suspicious man. They took them to Reddishville Country Park, a 161-acre park in Stockport, approximately 4 miles away from Jamie's home. The park consisted of woodland, steep ravines, walking trails and a golf course. It is dominated by a 16-arch railway bridge that spans the valley in which the park resides, and is popular with cyclists, walkers and horse riders. Any search of this beautiful location would be hampered by the nature of the area, which included 5 large ponds and regions of boggy ground, as well as steep embankments. The police started their search, focusing on the woods that had been identified by the 2 children. The area was overgrown. The thick woodland grew on a steep slope that treacherously dropped away in places. The officers struggled to keep their footing as they ventured deeper into the undergrowth. On October the 24th, approximately half a mile from the nearest footpath, searchers found an orange tarpaulin hidden amongst the leaves and branches, beneath which they found a green jacket and a pair of navy trousers. The items were removed and taken to the lab for forensic testing. The damp and soiled clothes were carefully unfolded for examination. During this process, a jawbone fell from the bundle of fabric. It was a small mandible, which was estimated to have belonged to a child approximately aged between 7 and 9 years old, due to its size and the presence of milk teeth. The clothing was also consistent with those of a child, and were close in appearance to those Jamie had last been seen wearing. Further searches of the area uncovered more bones. Sadly, the skull was never found, but investigators were certain that these were the remains of Jamie Lavis. However, they needed to prove this. The remains were examined closely to not only determine the identity, but also to find any clues as to the cause of death. After DNA tests were carried out on the milk teeth, that the police were able to confirm that they had found the body of Jamie Lavis, dismembered and scattered in a lonely patch of woodland. The investigation had now become a murder inquiry, and police didn't take long to arrest their prime suspect, a man who had been on their radar since the earliest stages of the investigation. On the 23rd of November 1997, police arrested Darren Vickers on suspicion of murder. Vickers was on the police radar just 24 hours after Jamie disappeared, when he came forward as a witness who claimed he was racked with guilt when he heard that little boy had gone missing. He visited Jamie's family on the 6th of May. He was welcomed into the Lavis home and sat on their sofa with a cup of tea Karen had made for him. He told them that he was a bus driver on the 219 bus route that ran from Manchester city centre past Jamie's home and onto the bus station at Ashton. That morning, the 8-year-old boy had boarded the bus on Ashton Old Road, just 4 minutes away from his home. He purchased a child's day saver ticket which allowed him unlimited travel on any bus in Greater Manchester. Jamie chose to stay on Darren's bus as he travelled back and forth from Ashton to Manchester. I myself am very familiar with the 219 bus route, as I regularly used the service when I lived in Manchester. I would catch it to get to college in Ashton or visit my best friend who lived there. After leaving college, it was my transport to Manchester city centre, where I would go to work, shopping and the cinema. The route between the city and Ashton takes roughly 20 minutes. But why did Jamie stay on the bus for 6 hours? Despite the IRA bombing, Manchester was still brimming with so many things to see and do, while Ashton is a bustling market town with shops and parks and other fun things for children. With 2 places full of things to explore, what made him stay on the bus all day? Early on, one reason became clear. Jamie loved buses. The family stated he was obsessed with them. It transpired that he liked to simply board a bus and enjoy the journey, so it wasn't out of character for him. So when the police received tips that Jamie had been seen on buses around the city in the days and weeks after his disappearance, there could have potentially been genuine sightings. A child going missing is a parent's worst nightmare, and as the hours turned to days, Karen and John struggled to cope. Their little boy was lost somewhere, missing out on his mummy cuddles and terrified of the dark. Their 15-year-old daughter Nicola stayed home from school to help their parents. She took care of her siblings, ensuring they had been washed, clothed and fed. Karen described how they became robotic in the days after Jamie's disappearance, just barely getting through each day. John Sr. in particular took Jamie's absence hard. He became withdrawn, isolated and disinterested in life. He left a void in the house, a role that Darren Vickers began to take on. Seeing their pain, he offered to help them. At first he spent time helping and leading searches, slowly building a bond with the Lavis family. He would join them for tea and spend time comforting them in their moments of despair. Seeing how distressed they were by the press attention, he offered to ease the pressure by being their spokesperson. The weeks passed, and Vickers was spending increasing amounts of time at the missing boy's house. Asif Hussain, who was the family's police liaison officer, was growing increasingly wary of the bus driver's presence at the family home. His concern was intensified when, after Vickers' house was searched by the police, he proceeded to move into the Lavis' house. Vickers didn't just move into the home. He slept in John and Karen's bed, while the distraught couple stayed downstairs on the sofas in the living room. He was now present for every press briefing and any updates in the investigation, and if he wasn't there, Karen confided in him the details. In her emotionally vulnerable state, she turned to Darren for strength and support. Grateful for his kindness, she felt she could confide in him. Despite the speculation that the bus driver knew more about Jamie's disappearance than he was stating, Karen and John refused to believe that their friend, who had been there for them since the beginning of their nightmare, could have anything to do with their son going missing. Especially after the police had searched his property and found nothing to suggest he was involved. While Vickers slept under the family's roof, the police were finding it increasingly difficult to maintain Karen and John's trust. Investigators felt that Darren was a person of interest. However, his proximity to the family and their unquestioning trust in him made it difficult for the police to discuss information regarding the case with Jamie's parents. They knew that any information would be passed on to their prime suspect, who, as they dug into his background, was making them increasingly concerned. Looking into his history, Darren Vickers had been working as a bus driver for just a couple of weeks prior to Jamie's disappearance. In an attempt to determine what type of person Darren was, they contacted the people who provided his references for his work application. Police were disturbed to discover that one of them was a registered sex offender. Darren Vickers was being watched closely. Asif Hussein's role was to support the family as their liaison officer, but he took on a dual role. He was at the Lavis home constantly, and he made notes of anything Darren said or did that may have been incriminating. Darren's willingness to participate in media interviews allowed police to delve deeper into his words and actions. Darren would tell the press how close he had grown to the family.
It's like one big close family now because we've been out virtually 24 hours a day, all of us involved looking for Jamie.
He reflected on what he felt regarding Jamie's disappearance.
I feel he's still alive. I don't fear the same way the police fear that he's murdered. His family don't. But somebody somewhere knows where Jamie is. Terrible. Could never dream of it. A young child on the bus like that, just going missing. It's just unbearable to think about. It's just a nightmare for everyone.
And disclosed his opinion on who may have taken the little boy.
There's somebody out there who's got to be sick keeping a child of that age. It shouldn't be done. If you had any respect, you just hand him over to the nearest police station. Just let the child go in. Just let him come home. He's not in trouble. He's not nothing. He's just wanted.
A comment he made in an early press interview caught investigators' attention.
It's like any child that has a day saver ticket which you boarded with. It's up to them what they do with it. They paid for the ticket. They can do really what they please with it.
After looking into the ticket purchased by Jamie, it was determined that day saver tickets were not issued to children. So, why was Jamie allowed to stay on the bus for 6 hours? Was it Darren being kind to the little boy who loved buses? Or something more sinister? As witnesses who had been on the bus on the bank holiday began to surface, a fuller picture was developing. Jamie was seen at the bus station at 10:30 a.m. on CCTV. He was accompanied by Vickers, who was seen talking to the boy, playfully messing with his sandy brown hair. Passengers who boarded the bus that Monday noted how Jamie was treating the bus like his own personal playground, running up and down the aisles with his infectious smile. Some witnesses stated that he had been allowed to process their ticket and took payment and handed out change. Others claimed that Jamie was sat in the cab with the driver and was helping change the gears. When the bus arrived at either Manchester or Ashton, Vickers let Jamie change the destination board. And when it was time for his break, he sent the 8-year-old to the shop to buy food and drink. For 6 hours, Jamie lingered on the bus. It must have been a dream come true for the little boy who adored anything to do with buses. He was known on occasion to travel on different bus routes in the city, but tragically, Darren Vickers would use Jamie's obsession to gain the little boy's trust. It is natural to question why the presence of this 8-year-old boy didn't raise any concerns with the passengers that day, but if we put ourselves in their shoes, he was a happy little boy enjoying riding on the bus, who seems to know the bus driver due to the manner in which they are interacting. Why would that be suspicious? Jamie wasn't in any obvious signs of distress, and if you were on the bus and saw the relationship with the driver, you would probably conclude that they knew each other, possibly as family members. An uncle or dad taking his child to work for the day, unable to get childcare, maybe an older brother. Also, you've got to consider that the longest time that someone was likely to spend on the bus was roughly 25 minutes, in which time most passengers are more distracted by their own lives, thinking about what they need to get for their shopping, or, oh no, I'm going to be late for work. And they probably didn't pay much attention to Jamie. Didn't think anything of his presence on the bus until Jamie Lavis was reported missing. By July, as the suspicion around him grew, Darren Vickers made a bizarre and unexpected move. He called Piccadilly Radio, a local station, to discuss the case.
11:52. Darren Vickers joins us on the phone now. Darren, you're the bus driver that was the last person to see little Jamie alive. How come he hasn't been seen since?
I'll never know till the day comes home. I still believe he's alive. If the case was what the police are making out to be, if the case was he was dead, around where they're looking, they'd have found him by now.
So how's the police investigation going?
The police are not letting much information out about that. It's the family is supposed to know, the first confirmed sightseeing.
Yeah.
We've never been told.
So how come he ended up in your car, Darren?
Well, I was coming back from Manchester, and I said to him that I'm going to have to start you back off now because this is my last run up. Jamie turned around and said to me, but my mum and dad's not in, I've got nowhere to go. And then I said to him, well, since you only live around the corner from me, I can take you back to the depot and drop you off when I go home. He was over the moon about it. He said, yeah. I said, are you sure you're going to be okay? He said, yeah. That was the last we saw of him.
If he had hoped that this would somehow stop him being a suspect, he was very much mistaken, as the interview revealed an inconsistency in his story that at the time most people were unaware of. Prior to the call, Vickers had claimed he had left Jamie at Ashton bus station, and that was the last he saw him. Then this evolved with him stating that he had witnessed Jamie being held by another bus driver, but this mysterious driver could not be traced. His story changed once more when he admitted to taking Jamie back to the bus depot and giving the little boy a lift in his car and leaving Jamie outside his grandmother's house. During the radio interview, his story changed again. The police were certain he was the man that was responsible for the disappearance of Jamie, but they had nothing concrete to charge him with. He was free to walk the streets, and police feared he may strike again. Fortunately, shortly after the radio interview, Darren Vickers was sent to prison for 10 weeks for driving offences. This not only meant that the streets of Manchester were a little bit safer, but it also allowed investigators time to build a case against the bus driver. Upon his release from prison, Karen and John Sr. waited for Darren at the prison gates. Despite the murmurs and speculation surrounding whether Vickers was guilty, his two biggest supporters were Jamie's parents. Darren had stood by them, comforted them, been there when they needed a friend, and now they were going to be there for him. That night, Darren was welcomed back into their home, and a party had been organised. This temporary reprieve was short-lived, as on the 14th of October, the police arrested Vickers on suspicion of Jamie's abduction. However, without a body or any concrete evidence, they could not charge him, and they were forced to release their prime suspect on bail. Darren went straight to the press after being released on bail, and he invited the media into the Lavis family's living room. Also, he could protest his innocence.
If I would have never come forward in the first place, just to let them know that I'd seen Jamie on that day, there'd never been nothing the wiser today. They'd have been ripping their head, pulling at straws, I thought I did the right decent thing in letting them know that I'd seen him on the day, but I'd never thought I'd have been arrested on suspicion of his abduction. I think it's just a joke. That I've got nothing to do with the abduction of James Lavis, and I've got the backing of the Lavis family, relations, everybody.
Meanwhile, Karen and John started to have their own doubts about Darren. Perhaps it was the 10 weeks apart that had finally broken his hold over the couple, and they were beginning to see his manipulative character for themselves. People around them had seen it also. Their family liaison officer, Asif Hussain, had known for months that Darren was controlling the desperate and vulnerable family, but he was unable to intervene as Vickers had worked hard to make the family lose trust in the police, especially when they kept arresting him. He portrayed himself as a good Samaritan who would come to them in their hour of need, but could not be conclusively connected to Jamie's disappearance. Both Asif and Jamie's sister, Nicola, found one aspect of Darren's character very unnerving, and that was the manner in which he treated 11-year-old John. The poor boy had been weighed down with guilt. He wrongly blamed himself for Jamie going missing, believing he had failed in his responsibility as the big brother to protect him. Darren saw the little boy's pain and started giving John more attention, buying him new clothing and shoes and even a new bike in an attempt to lift John's spirits, or if that's what he wanted people to think. Police speculated that his motives were much darker. They believed he was grooming John, who was the spitting image of Jamie, and they feared that Darren had found his next target. Investigators suspected that Darren was using 11-year-old John for another purpose. In what he wanted to show publicly as an attempt to cheer John up, Darren would take the boy to work with him, driving the various routes around Manchester. Police wondered if Darren had been using John's likeness of his brother to throw them off the scent, by making people think they had seen Jamie on the buses in the days after his disappearance. Darren Vickers was seen as a controlling and manipulative individual who preyed on the vulnerable. What he did to Jamie's parents defies explanation, but what he did to John, how could that little boy possibly learn to trust anyone ever again, after the sickening truth about his family's friend and confidant finally emerged? A month after the skeletal remains had been found in the woods, police confirmed that it was Jamie Lavis. The family were devastated. They still held on to the hope that their little boy was still alive, a hope that Darren had been encouraging, despite police warning the family that their son was probably no longer alive. Then the police arrived on the 23rd of November and arrested Darren Vickers on suspicion of murder. The seeds of doubt had already been planted in Kevin and John's minds. They still struggled to believe that Darren was responsible for abducting and killing Jamie. I don't think I've heard of a case like this, where a stranger befriends the distraught family, where the person responsible for the murder of their loved ones moves into their home and sleeps in their bed while they sleep on the sofa. The psychological effects of what Darren did to this family will probably never fade. They were going through the worst moments of their lives, and somebody pretending to be kind and caring and there to support them took advantage of that. One of the most sickening images that appeared in the press was a photograph of Darren sat bare-chested on the sofa, his arms wrapped around Karen and John's shoulders as they sat either side of him. I wonder what was going through their minds as they paused for this picture that has since become a sickening poster for the case. Karen looks defeated. John's eyes appear distant, his hands clasped together like they are in handcuffs. And Darren sits between them, confident, controlling, and defiant. He maintained his defiance as he was questioned by police regarding Jamie's murder. He denied any wrongdoing, but while awaiting trial, he apparently told a cellmate that the little boy's death had been a tragic accident. Jamie had fallen backwards and struck his head on a handrail on the bus, which killed him. In a panic, Darren loaded the little boy into the boot of his car and left Jamie Lavis, his lifeless body, in the woods at Reddish Trail. He, however, later denied ever telling his following this story, and on the 2nd of March 1999, the trial began, during which Darren was going to torment Jamie's family further. Not only would they have to listen to the details of their son's last moments, but they would also find themselves being the victims of cold and baseless accusations presented by the defence. Darren Vickers claimed that he and Karen had begun an affair shortly after Jamie went missing, providing salacious details of how intimate they were. The defence used press photographs to back up this claim, specifically highlighting Karen holding hands and hugging Darren. All I could think when I heard this was, how heartless can people be? Karen's son was missing, and she was having to talk to the media while struggling to deal with her new nightmare. I think she's allowed to share a hug and hold a friend's hand for comfort. And yet, these innocent actions of a devastated mother were twisted to create a scandalous lie that had no relevance to what happened to Jamie. What was worse was that Darren claimed Karen was pregnant with his child, and she was forced to have a DNA test to prove his claim false. Jamie's dad took the disappearance of his son extremely hard. It must have been horrific for him to have to sit in the courtroom as these lies were being told, but his own innocence would be called into question too. When the defence accused John Lavis Sr. of being responsible for his son's death. Fortunately, none of these false accusations made a difference to the verdict when on the 23rd of April, Darren Vickers was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 25 years.
Justice has been done today for Jamie. Hopefully now he can rest in peace. No child deserves to die the way Jamie died, and hopefully now Darren Vickers is in prison. children in Manchester will be safer.
After forcing the family to endure a 7-week trial, just 24 hours after sentencing, Vickers confessed to killing Jamie. Police had long suspected that Jamie did not die on the bus after striking his head on a handrail. They believed that Vickers had taken Jamie to Reddish Vale, just like he had taken the 2 children who helped find Jamie's remains. They speculated that due to the steep nature of where Jamie was found, it would have been impossible to carry a body there. Therefore, Jamie was alive when he entered the wooded area. Once in the remote location, Darren proceeded to sexually assault and kill Jamie. Vickers' confession mirrored the police's theory. However, he elaborated on how Jamie had died. He claimed that the little boy started calling for his mummy, and Darren strangled the little, defenceless 8-year-old who had trusted him. He also claimed he returned to the site on numerous occasions to visit Jamie. Due to his manipulative nature, his motives for confessing were deemed to be for his own personal gain. He hoped it would lead to a reduction in his sentence, but he failed. A few years into his prison sentence, Darren Vickers, the convicted child killer, was attacked by another inmate. While working in the prison workshop, Darren was set upon by Richard Kenneth Tunstall, a man with a history of violence. Following the attack, Vickers was transported to hospital, where he was found to have multiple skull fractures. He survived the attack and is eligible for parole in 2024, which to me is a terrifying thought. Darren took their child, he preyed on their vulnerability and destroyed their trust. But the one thing Darren Vickers could not do was break the bond of family. His actions actually brought the Lavis family closer together. They struggle every day with losing Jamie, who they lovingly described as an energetic scrap of a lad. He was inquisitive, outgoing, and downright precocious, all of which were great qualities for a little boy. Jamie missed out on meeting his little brother. He is not there to play with his nieces and nephews, nor will he marry and have children of his own. His life was cruelly taken by a monster who took advantage of a trusting little boy who loved buses. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you are continuing to enjoy the podcast. As always, feel free to get in touch on Facebook or Twitter to discuss this episode and much more. There is also a Patreon page, www.patreon.com/itsmurderupnorth. Please show your support and sign up today for exclusive content. You can also support the show by listening, reviewing and spreading the word. During my episodes, I am trying to avoid mentioning what is happening in the world at the moment. We all need a bit of escapism. However, I do just want to pray that you are all safe and in good health. Episode 14 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.